I'm Meg Whalen. I'm the Director of Communications for the College of Arts and Architecture, and I'm sitting in today for Stephen Ward. And today on the Live Wire, we're going to talk about a really exciting performance that the College of Arts and Architecture is presenting at the end of this month, May 31st, at the Night Theater Uptown, Deep Water, the Murder Ballads. And already the title is intriguing. And today I have with me the creators of Deep Water, the Murder Ballads, E. Balcos, who teaches in the Department of Dance, and John Allemeier, who teaches in the Department of Music. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how these pieces came to be and what they are and how you can come and see them. So John, why don't you start out by telling us what is a murder ballad?
Murder ballad is a subgenre of ballads, and so ballads are simply songs that tell stories, and murder ballads tell the story of murders. And so these murder ballads particularly are tell the story of notorious murders that happened in North Carolina, and that's one of the reasons E.E. and I sort of drew these together, because we wanted to do something that was based, where we're located.
So these are actually murders that occur. These are historic events.
These are real historic events that are passed down actually musically or artistically through these folk songs. And so some of them, most of these, well, they're all 19th century murder ballads, and so they're very old songs.
And how is it that you and E.E. decided to work together to create music and dance based on these ballads?
Go ahead.
We started working together about 6 years ago, and our process of collaboration has evolved and increased in the communication and the going back and forth between each other. So in 2011, we started doing our first murder ballad, which is Poor Ellen. In the process of creating music and dances together, we had started going towards more of a narrative, so that we could both follow a similar narrative in our overall conceptual design. And so we discovered that here was a genre that could capture the public's attention, because everyone's interested in murder. If you watch the news, or if we're watching any television show, it's all about forensics and the police department and find out who murdered who. And so it really catches the public's eye. Not only that, we're also looking at local culture. So we can also look at the culture of North Carolina. We can see how these actual murders occurred during the 19th century, and then see how they are passed down through culture, through the folk culture that's local. So they're passed down over the generations, and now we're taking it and we're actually passing it down some more by evolving our interpretation of the ballad itself.
So why don't we start and talk about the first one that you did, Poor Ellen, and maybe you can tell us first, what is the story of Poor Ellen and what happened to her?
Poor Ellen was a woman who lived in Winston-Salem in the 1890s. She was a peasant girl, not very well-to-do, and she basically started a relationship with Peter de Graaf. That there's some speculation on why that relationship went wrong, whether it was he was engaged to someone else, or he perhaps got her pregnant or something like that, and so he was trying to end that relationship. He ends up shooting her and killing her. And so Peter de Graaf then, he goes on the run, eventually is captured, is brought to justice. And so the murder ballad itself tells the story of Peter de Graaf and Ellen Smith, and a lot of it's based on regret. It's told in the first person. Peter de Graaf regrets having killed Ellen, and that's evident in the lyrics themselves. And so it's one of the themes that we pick up on as artists when we're creating the piece. And I think that Peter de Graaf actually is the one who wrote the murder ballad for Ellen Smith.
Yeah,
according to history, that's supposedly
while he was in prison.
Mm-hmm. And so it was. So it's all told in the first person, what had happened, and it's just a fascinating song.
So then, tell us maybe first, E.E., how you take that story and translate it into a dance work, a choreographed piece that has no text.
Right.
It's all done in...
I think that what we do, though, is we do it together as an overall conceptual design, so that we're telling the narrative together, so that we can discuss, okay, what's going to happen here, what's going to happen here, how many sections is this? But based on my dancers, they all have their characters. So each murder ballad, you're going to have your victim, you're going to have your killer, and you're going to have your other members that might be family members or siblings that might be also in the dance. So we take the lyrics, we really take the lyrics of the ballad, and we look at its structure, and we look at where it goes as a narrative, and then we give it an abstraction, an abstract narrative that happens through movement and dance. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't have a literal sense to it at all, but it's taking, because you're not showing any real violence, but you're showing dynamics of movement and nuance in movement. And so you're really taking something that actually was violent, and you're making something more beautiful out of it, something that's engaging to watch, and that's physical and kinesthetic.
Why don't we watch a little bit of it? We have a montage of a performance of this work that was done here on campus as part of a faculty dance concert. And we can see and hear a little bit.
So one of the things about the character of Ellen Smith, who's Audrey Barron here in the front, was that historically it was written that perhaps she wasn't quite right of mind, and that maybe she just wasn't thinking normally, thinking right. And so what we do is we show in the movement that Audrey has some motifs, gestural motifs that show that she's just a little crazy. And here is actually herself dying. And the string quartet that John wrote for this is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most gorgeous string quartets I'd ever heard. And it's so poignant. And it really adds to the movement, and the movement adds to the score.
Tell me a little bit about that, John. I know that these murder ballads do have tunes. I mean, they are songs.
Sure.
And so they have often folk tunes that existed that I think in the ballad tradition it was not uncommon for someone to write a new set of lyrics to a pre-existing tune that had been passed down through the ages. Tell me how you both take that tune in a ballad and somehow use that as a starting point, but then also use the narrative and the choreographic shape to drive the composition.
Sure. Well, when E.E. and I always start a piece, it starts together. It's not about one thing happening and then another, me writing the music and then E.E. choreographing separately. It is, we start from start at the same time. We're going to do Poor Ellen Smith. Here's our subject matter. Here's the lyrics. Here's what the song sounds like. Here's the history of it. So we're both engaged right up front, and that lends to, and when we're doing that, E.E. influences how the music is written. And then as that goes along, I actually influence how the choreography works out. And so we're sort of always in the engaged in the process, no matter where along the way it is. Whether it's me writing music, E.E. has a place there. And so one of what E.E. mentioned earlier is that we start with this narrative, and that's the sort of external source that we're both sort of triangulating around. We're looking at that source and we're commenting on it to each other, and what's the narrative going to look like? How's this timeline play out? What's the chronology of events that happen in this story? And one of the things that E.E. and I talk about is there's no set, there's no scenery. And so the music is the set of the scenery. So I sort of set the stage. And so it may be, in Poor Ellen, how do we talk about regret? How do I musically represent regret, and how does E.E. physically manifest that regret? And so how do those motives become, transferred from what I do musically? It starts perhaps starts a trajectory there that then is completed in the movement. And so in a basic sense, one of the things that I do is I have to get to know that. And one of the reasons I think we started with this, at least it was very comfortable for me, is I'd never worked with a choreographer before working with EE. And so using a source material that is, first of all, narrative based, but also musically based, was a very comfortable place for me to be. And so as part of my process, EE and I have the lyrics, we have the original ballad, and I start singing the ballad, I start getting to know it. And then, through my creative process, certain things start bending and shaping, and so that in each of these pieces, the original ballad appears in some way. Whether it's overtly stated, and someone will say, oh, if Riley Baugus performs the original ballad and they say, oh, that they hear a relationship directly to the music or not, may or may not occur, but it's always present, and it's sort of the genesis of the idea at all times. And so, listening to the ballad, playing the ballad, harmonizing the ballad, and I just basically take that ballad and I begin to internalize it, and that becomes the material, the subject matter, the DNA of the music, if you will. And so it's not that you may hear a quotation of that music, but all of the music, every single note, is derivative from that ballad through my process.
Right. And I think it's important to say that the performance that people will see and hear on May 31st is a performance with live music, which is not always the case in dance these days. Unfortunately, it's so common to use recorded music, but we are very fortunate to have live music. Poor Ellen with a string quartet, and as you mentioned in your commentary just now, we do have a folk singer, Riley Baugus. Tell us a little bit about Riley and what his role is in this performance. Sure.
Well, the way the performance works chronologically will be that Riley Baugus, who's a North Carolina-based folk singer, amazing banjo player, he will come out and he will talk a little bit about, say, Poor Ellen Smith, maybe tell the story a little bit, and then he will actually sing the original Murder Ballad. Lights go down, curtains open, and then EE and our work is then presented, and he'll do that for each of the pieces. And so it's one of the interesting aspects of this performance is it's not just a contemporary music and dance performance, but it's actually a performance that shows this is the original, this is what we're reacting to in its original form, and then all the way through the genesis of the work that EE and I do. And so it's not only a music and dance performance, but it's almost a performance of the creative process beginning to end. And I think that's one of the things that makes it particularly unique.
If you have questions for us, please email us, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Let's go on and talk about the next dance on the program. It actually, I think, is the most recently completed. In fact, EE, when did you finish?
I pretty much finished the piece last night. It's called Pieces of Silver, and it's about, it's from the Ballad of Frankie Silver, and Frankie is a woman, Frances, and she, let's see, she actually cuts her husband into pieces, dismembers his body.
Pretty gruesome.
And in order to hide the crime, she and her family members help hide the body and try to burn the body. So it is a very, very, very gruesome piece.
Where was she from?
She was from, now I'm having a block in
Burke County?
Burke County.
Burke County, right.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
So around the Morganton area.
Yeah. Yes, and actually she was hanged in Morganton. So she was imprisoned, and somehow, and this historically, and somehow they busted her out of prison.
Her family. Her
family busted her out of prison. She got caught again, and then she was hanged. In the ballad itself, though, in the lyrics itself, after she was hanged, she is confronted by her dead husband, and so they are both perhaps in the underworld or something like that. So one of the fun things about our narrative is that actually it's almost a little bit like fantasy or something, where you can play with, well now they're in a dead place, now they're in the underworld, or now they're in heaven, or so that's one of the things that we get to do with our artistic license, and by following the lyrics of the ballad, that you can explore so many different ways of going.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a really fascinating story.
The story of Frankie Silver is probably one of the most famous of these kinds of stories from North Carolina. The story itself is very famous, actually, but the ballad itself is one of the is the most rare of these three of the group. It's one that you don't. I only found one recording of it from 1929, I think. So it's the music itself. The original ballad is not particularly popular, but the story itself, there are books written about it and articles written about it, and it's quite famous.
Well, and I guess there's some discussion about whether she was justified in murdering her husband because perhaps he was abusive to her.
It's an interesting part of the whole history surrounding Frankie Silver is that there are actually books written that, and there are two families, Frankie Silver's family, the Stewarts, and then the Charlie Silver's family, the Silvers. It seems to be there's still sort of this debate going on, sort of Hatfield and McCoy kind of thing, in that was Frankie just protecting herself when she killed Charlie, or was Charlie this really nice guy and there's no reason for her to have done that and she was kind of crazy, and so I mean there are books written within the last 10 years that are still debating this, that whether, who was wrong in this whole situation. Was Frances Silver a battered wife and Charlie an alcoholic, or was she just this crazy woman that hit him with an axe while he was sleeping? And so it's a compelling story that still, I don't think it's over yet. It's still going on.
And all the issues that we've been talking about that happen actually is what is influencing the characterizations of each of the dancers. And even last night, before we ran it for the first time last night, we sat in a circle and we went around, and each dancer, and I should have videotaped that, each dancer, I said, well, what's your motivation going on here? What is your story? You all have to have a story that's going on. What's your relationship with each of the dancers on stage? Were you abused? Was he drunk? All kinds of things like that. So, which they're infusing into their dancing and into their performance. So, I would say that in creating the dance, they also, each individual dancer is their own artist that helps create the character. And so, I also told them last night, it's like, well, you each have relationships, and you're describing a space on stage. Now, wherever you are in that space, there's this invisible line that happens from one dancer to the other, and all the intention and relationship that they have is involved. And so these positions keep changing throughout spatially. And so what I tell my dancers is that I want you to increase the strength of these threads as you go, every time you perform the piece. And what they're doing actually is creating a tapestry. And so I say, you're creating a stronger and stronger tapestry. You're saying that story over and over again, and it becomes deeper and deeper. And so one of the wonderful things about performing dance is the more times it's performed, and with music, the more times the performers perform it, the deeper it gets. And the deeper it gets for the audience members who are listening to it or who are watching it.
It's one of the things we talked about, and I was at a rehearsal not long ago, that and I give comments to the dancers, and they're not necessarily about the movement, but it's more about intention. And one of the things we talked about is that the deeper you can get into it right now, right from the start, the more when it comes to performance, it's just letting that out, as opposed to, oh, now I move this way, it's not a chronology of movement, but that's just the way I express this character. And so how we, and it's difficult for us to, as artists and sort of producers and things, how do we ask them to get that far into it? And it's like E said, it's a number of rehearsals, a number of performances. The deeper we can get it to go, and the more that projects itself or manifests itself in their performance.
I was going to ask, what kind of music do we have for Pieces of Silver? What's the instrumentation? We had string quartet for Poor Ellen.
So this one is a small, and they're all small chamber groups. This one is violin, cello, flute, clarinet, and percussion. And so this one ended up being sort of a pickup game of instrumentalists, because the first piece that E.E. and I did was Poor Ellen, which was the string quartet. The last piece, which we haven't talked about yet, is mainly winds and percussion. And so just from an economical standpoint, if I'm going to hire musicians and get them to play, drawing from each of those. And so it's a mixture of, there's 2 string players, there's 1 percussionist, there's 2 wind players.
Plus it sort of serves as a bridge, almost an oral bridge between the all strings and the all kind of winds and everything, to have that combination of the two.
And I would also say that because the way the program is ordered, it starts with Poor Ellen, it ends with Deep Water, and so this most recent piece that we're doing, Pieces of Silver, falls in between. And so E.E. and I have had very overt conversations about, well, how does Poor Ellen, how does Pieces of Silver transition us from Poor Ellen to Deep Water at the end? And so there's sort of aspects of each piece on either side of it influencing it, at least.
Oh, did you want to?
Oh, I was just going to say, in relationship to the music, as he's pulling from the actual melodic, the melodies and motifs of the folk song, and that you hear those through some of the music that John wrote, is my counterpoint, where I have phrasing or motifs that equally repeat themselves and show themselves in counterpoint with the music. So both visually and aurally, you're going to keep getting this message. You're going to keep getting something that's going to engage you over and over again.
That's very interesting. So that visually, it almost demonstrates a certain structure that's evident in the music as well.
And there's one more thing that, and John mentioned this in a rehearsal, in a dancer rehearsal the other day. It's like he said to the dancers, it's like, this is a counterpoint. You know, they're equally important. The dance is important. The music is important. They're on top of each other.
Right.
But we get to the point where the dancers know the music so well that they begin to initiate the phrase before the music even starts. So sometimes the music will follow the dancers.
It's an interesting process because a lot of the dance rehearsals happen to recorded music. And at times we have to, in this conversation, was that a lot of times they may be reacting to what the sound is doing, and what we want the dancers to do is to move in a way that, even though while they're rehearsing to recorded music, that the music is reacting to them. And so because in live performance, the musicians can react to them, and so we need to get them used to that idea.
That's what makes dancing to live music so much more exciting. As a performance, I think. Well, why don't we take a look at some images from the final piece on the program, Deep Water, which names the whole program, and tell us a little bit about what this is about, who is it about, what the story is, and what the movement is showing us.
Do you want to talk about Omi Wise?
Sure, I'll talk about Omi Wise. Omi Wise, so Deep Water is based on folk song Omi Wise. And Omi Wise was a woman, let's see, these events are all around 1808, 1810, something like that.
Yes, this was the earliest
This is the
one.
earliest murder ballad of the group that we're doing. And one of the things that E.E. and I came across was that this was the second piece chronologically that we created. And after doing Poor Ellen, we quickly realized that these murder ballads have a very similar chronology of events that happen. Boy meets girl, boy gets girl in trouble, boy wants out of relationship, boy kills girl. And so how are we going to create some kind of variety in what we're doing? And so Poor Ellen is the very first one was more of a direct telling of that story, and we realized we couldn't do that in this piece. And so we immediately started going through again the lyrics and the music and the history of it. And one of the things we found that we latched onto was that in this piece, Omi Wise is drowned. So she's Jonathan Lewis is the murderer, and he throws her in deep water, and that's where the title comes from. And so there are these water themes that happen throughout. And so this image that we have here is it's her in water, and so there's always all these water themes and floating, and so that was one of the themes that we picked up on in order to make sure there's some sort of variation on what's going on.
The other way that we created this too is that since we have this artistic license and we don't want to show, like Poor Ellen, just the chronology of what happens in the ballad, it's like, well, let's mix up the chronology. So the very opening scene, which was the earlier, well, no, this is part of it too. The very opening scene, we start out with dead bodies. So rather than we die at the end of the piece, you start dead already. So there are these floating corpses. Well, that John kind of called it.
Yeah, I affectionately called the first
section
movement floating corpse music. Before we had a new real title.
So we open the piece with these corpses that are floating down a river, which, and from there they begin to rise, and it kind of goes backwards a little bit in terms of what happens and how they meet. Another interesting thing about this is with the character of Omi Wise, I never show her get killed. I never show her get drowned. And at the end of the piece, or maybe I'm giving too much away. No. Well, no,
It's okay. I think you can. Spoiler alert.
At the very end of the piece, and I'm Jonathan Lewis, so I'm the murderer here, who turns into a monster. And actually, John has a section that he called Monster, and this is where this Jonathan Lewis, who was this kind of schoolboy, prep school kind of boy, and he turns into this monster. But at the very end of the piece, we show Omi Wise going backwards, and she actually gets up and walks off stage, which is the very end of the entire Murder Ballad. So we show hope. We show some hope.
Let's see a few more images.
One of the things that E.E. and I found out was that in researching this, that Omi Wise herself was a bit of a predator's a little bit strong, but she was a woman who made a habit of trying to get men to marry her, and so apparently had children with multiple men, trying to create a living for herself. And so one of the movements, and this image is from that movement, it's called Seduction, and it's the seduction that happens between the two of them. And it ends up that she at some point realizes that she has sort of snared a higher predator, and that, you know, she was just trying to find a husband, but this guy's actually, you know, really a dangerous person. And so it's these are some images from that movement, which is a really striking part of the piece, I think.
Another fun thing that John actually did with this section was this seduction section was that it turns into sort of like a tango dance. And so we have the seduction, we have a modernized tango going on. It's very intriguing.
Some more floating.
And I love that image. It seems to really kind of capture even for the whole set, this idea of maybe women in peril. And I think what's interesting about these murder ballads and about the genre as a whole, so many of them, of course there are murder ballads that are not about women. There's Tom Dooley, which is North Carolina's most famous murder ballad. But it's still, with these three, even though you have one woman who is the murderer, the other two are the victims, but what's interesting is in some of the literature about murder ballads, that the murder ballads both reflect a certain attitude toward women, a certain attitude toward morality, and then also help to shape that, so that they're both a reflection of what people think of women, or people think of relationship, or what people think of men and women, and then also they serve to kind of shape that understanding as well as they're passed down from generation to generation. And so this image of the woman kind of almost reaching up for help in a way or something, to me is a striking one. So what remains to be done to get ready for the big performance on the 31st, and how can people find tickets? And
can we bring up Carolina Ticks?
Oh, that's.
Should we do that? And then
absolutely.
That's there.
Well, I guarantee anyone who comes to this performance to be completely engaged the moment they sit down, the moment they hear the live musicians playing, the moment they see the very first thing on stage, that it is completely engaging. Each piece, although it has a separate murder ballad, it still has a flow, so the whole three pieces make a complete set. Even choreographically, the spatial design from piece to piece is all considered, so that the big tapestry that I'm making actually is quite full. So we're very, very excited. Do you want to talk about this?
Talk about, this is where you can get tickets, I think.
Carolina Ticks, and in fact, we have a discount for UNC Charlotte faculty and staff, so if you go on to buy tickets, either through the website that you see on the screen, or you can go through the phone to the telephone number 704-372-1000. That's the Carolina Ticks telephone number. And if you mention either online or by phone the promo code UNCC, then you will get a reduced ticket price of only $15, which is a really amazing deal for an evening-long performance of live music and live dance. It's an astonishingly good price.
Well, and I also want to point out that even though this is a university-supported event, these are professional musicians, these are professional dancers. This is not student work, but this is professional work. So you're going to hear the best performers and the best dancers that we can get. So.
Well, thank you so much for telling us all about it and giving us some insight into how these works came about and what your creative process is. John and EE have a Tumblr site, murderballads.tumblr.com, where you can actually see the creative process unfolding. And next week on Live Wire, the guest will be Mary Lynn Calhoun, who is the Dean of the College of Education. She'll be retiring in June, and so she's going to come and kind of recap her career here at UNC Charlotte and talk about the challenges and the accomplishments that she has had during her tenure here. So we hope you'll join us next Thursday, same time, same place.